So if you've done anything within risk management, you know this cycle. This cycle, again, is going to be ongoing. You're going to identify, then you're going to analyze, then you're going to response plan, which is making sure you have a mitigation strategy for all those risks that you've identified. And then you're going to monitor. And that cycle is going to go on and on throughout the life of your project.
Thanks, Kim. So before we jump into actually utilizing the risk register, there's some things that we need to make sure that the project team is on the same page about, just in order to have a productive conversation about the risks on the job. So starting with key terminology, I'm not going to go through and define all of these key terms, but it's really important that if you're sitting in a meeting talking about risk, that if somebody uses the word threat or uses any of the words that are up on this screen, that everybody has a common understanding of what these terms are. All of these terms are defined in RP 10S90 and pertain to risk. So we put this in here. It might sound like common sense, but sometimes when you start talking about risk with a diverse group of people that have various levels of experience talking about risk or dealing with risk, what one person might view as an issue, another person might be thinking that's a risk. And we're actually going to talk about risk versus issues later in the presentation. So the point here is just to make sure that the people that are involved in your risk management and identification especially all have a common understanding of these terms. The majority of our presentation today, we're going to walk you through a sample risk register. I'd like to highlight that it is a sample. There's nothing to say that this is the only way that a risk register can be set up, but we are going to walk through the key parts that if you were going to set up your own risk register, there's key parts that every risk register should contain. And so don't worry, I'm going to zoom in on these various parts because I know that you can't read this slide. So at the very basic level, one of the very first things you want to start with is the basic contract information. And the reason that we're going to talk about contract information and defining thresholds is when we are talking about qualitatively rating risks, we're generally using a scale of 1 to 5 to rate our risks, both in the areas, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but in the areas of cost and schedule and probability, we're using a 1 through 5 rating or a 1 through 4 rating, depending on how your register is set up. And so we have to define what do those things mean. And when we get into what does a 1 mean, or what does a 3 mean, or what does a 5 mean, we really have to have an idea of what kind of job are we talking about. A $100,000 risk on $1 million job is way different than a $100,000 risk on a $100 million job. So we're just getting this basic understanding so everybody has a good concept of the guidelines we're working on, and not just related to contract value, but also related to schedule. So again, a 30-day risk on a 2-year job is way different than a 30-day risk on a 1-year job. So we like to have this just general information so that we can all be on the same page about the magnitude of the job itself.